I'll keep saying it every week.
Yeah.
Texas is a blue state.
Just keep dreaming,
gerrymandered into people believing that it's red.
Keep dreaming.
But today we're going to talk about some workplace safety and OSHA. So, federal OSHA officials started discussing marijuana industry worker safety, which is very interesting considering that's a federal agency and our entire industry is considered federally illegal. Two officials with the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, spoke this week about the agency's latest guidance and priorities for protecting workers within the cannabis industry in a growing number of state legal markets. One official called for better tracking and reporting of negative health outcomes after recounting what she described as the first fatality from occupational asthma in the U.S. cannabis industry. A Massachusetts worker for the multi-state operator Trulieve who collapsed at work and died in 2022. The Tuesday webinar featured two OSHA representatives, Yasmin Daniels, an industrial hygienist with the agency, and Virginia Weaver, a doctor and medical officer. Daniels began by giving an overview of OSHA's federal and state guidelines and how to apply those to cannabis, while Weaver spoke about the 2022 asthma death and how to better prevent such incidents. The most important thing is involvement from the industry to train workers and managers to identify and report symptoms of occupational allergy, Weaver said at the online event hosted by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals, an organization that certifies safety practitioners. Workers who develop a runny nose, rhinitis, congestion, eye or throat irritation, skin rash or hives, or even more importantly, if it's already progressed to lung symptoms with cough, wheezing, or shortness of breath, they need to know who to report that to in their workplace as soon as these develop. Though cannabis is still illegal under federal law, OSHA's federal and state plans around health and safety standards are nevertheless applicable to employers engaged in commercial cannabis. That comes not only through federal guidance, but also OSHA-approved state plans in 29 jurisdictions, most of which apply to both public and private employees. Some state plans, such as those in Michigan, Oregon, and Washington state, include specific guidance and enforcement details around commercial cannabis operations. For example, the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, MIOSHA, recently issued a state emphasis program that covers the growing, harvesting, and processing of the plant. They also provide guidance and are working together with the state's cannabis regulatory agency. Skip ahead a little bit. Within the industry broadly, risks to workers can vary considerably by what kind of business they work for, Daniels added. Growers might be exposed to mold and pesticides and flammable liquids, while processors might deal with solvents, combustible dust, and loud noise. Retail workers could see exposure to various chemicals as well as workplace violence. Daniel said that while the cannabis industry has several unique considerations, guidance from other sectors like the tobacco industry or even grain production provides a useful reference for some of the issues facing marijuana employees. Weaver's portion of the presentation focused on the 2022 death of Massachusetts cannabis worker Lorna McMurray, 27, who collapsed at a Trulieve cultivation facility. An OSHA investigation published the next year found her death was the result of occupational asthma that led to cardiac arrest and anoxic brain injury. Weaver, who is the lead author on that investigation, said the first major point she wanted to make is that the magnitude of exposures in the occupational setting is way more than the recreational setting. There are some who think that because a number of cannabis employees may also use the product recreationally, they could not possibly develop any work-related symptoms from it, she said, and that's not in fact the case. The exposures in the occupational setting are much greater. Weaver said that better detection protocols at workplaces, referrals to appropriate specialists, and robust research into cannabis-related risks are essential to improve health and safety in the industry. Importantly, we need research because we need to know which exposures and job titles are the highest risk for these respiratory outcomes, because you can't prevent what you aren't able to identify. There's a little bit more detail about the presentation and the investigation into the death of that worker at Trulieve, Lorna McMurray. But overall, I think it's a very positive sign that a federal worker safety authority like OSHA is starting to discuss cannabis worker safety, even though it's still considered federally legal under federal law. But with that, want to give a shout out to Marijuana Moment for covering the story. And this is Soham Shah with High at 9 News. I'd like to pass it over to the rest of the team and see what everyone has to say.
I would like to say the coverage that we saw go down
and we were the only ones. We were the first ones to cover that Lorna Murray story with a national footprint. And unfortunately, we saw not just the death, but the backlash that happened to the community. And Trulieve actually just bouncing on the entire community and leaving like 30,000 jobs in limbo. And OSHA actually let them buy their way out of the settlement. Like that, it was a fine. All that OSHA could do in that situation was fine them like $38,000, and then they got that reduced to like $9,000, right? And so I wish I had more faith in government institutions like this, but just like the majority of the rest of them, I gotta say I do have a traditional Republican stance on this one. Not the current Republican stance, but yeah, just get rid of.
Not a rhino Republican, you're saying then, right, Rico?
If they're not going to actually protect people, then why do they exist?
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think this OSHA thing is a total joke, and just by their actions of what with the tragedy that happened at Trulieve and their lack of enforcement powers of what they actually have the capability to do in relation to what they did do, it, to me, is just a joke and makes the whole system a joke and their whole agency.
So what you're saying, Jason, is that you think that they need more authority to actually be able to provide safety
I
for
said
workers.
they have enough authority. They just didn't exercise it.
Okay, so they should exercise the authority that they have, though.
In that case, yes, they should. When you have a death on the workforce, yes, that should be like a full blown investigation. All right, not just punishable by a $40,000 fine. I mean, where did that money even go? Like they need to be making sure that they're taking care of the family, all of the funeral costs, all of those types of things and whatnot. And none of that was in there, and that is just despicable.
I agree with that 100%.
It's going to be a work comp injury, and work comp's going to cover all those things. And I've had to do this. I always bring in an industrial hygienist in any of these facilities where people are going to be exposed to anything that might be a solvent, anything in the air. We want to know ahead of time, do you have any conditions that might be affected by being in this environment so that we can take steps to try to mitigate it before it gets out, or just tell you, look, if you got asthma, you got no business working in a place, you're going to be exposed to molds, mildews, dusts, and things like that. So I'm sorry, it's not discriminatory. It's just that you got a medical condition, we can't accommodate you. There are no standards in the industry. That's the problem. Every state does this differently. Every city in California or county has a different set of standards we have to apply to all of this stuff. And it's a hodgepodge right now. Generally speaking, this is pretty safe, okay, to work around it. But if you have a condition that's a set stage to go into anaphylactic shock because you get something in your lungs, you probably shouldn't be working around contaminants, okay? That's another part of this problem. And small businesses can't afford to put in $1 million worth of, hygienic equipment to clean the air so that we can protect the average person from exposure that the average person should be able to deal with. It's a mess, and it's just another part of the problems why we can't get this industry up and running, because as soon as somebody dies, everybody's butt puckers up and they run out and shut everything down, rather than let's do some logistical points here where we can test the atmosphere, what we're going to get. I mean, for God's sakes, if it's a whiff of this gets out across the property line, if you smell weed, the whole world's upset. Inside these buildings, if you're in a greenhouse and you have problems being around plant molds, I don't know what to tell you. You shouldn't be working there. Or the same thing in a processing facility. We just need a better understanding of where the safety line is and then how to monitor people. Because I represent a lot of businesses, and this is a problem for businesses. How do we deal with this without any uniform standards?
I thought they made a really good point in the article too about saying, sorry, Rico, but
go ahead.
About saying that there's this misconception especially among operators and business owners, that just because a lot of people that work in the industry consume off the clock, but they're somehow immune from any kind of negative effect. And I whatever we want to say about the effectiveness of OSHA as an agency,
Come back here.
I think that's a very astute point, because I can remember even back in the day working in a dispensary leading up to 420, like this week, maybe 10 years ago, and they have us in the back rolling 1,000 pre-rolled joints, and there was so much keef and pollen and dust from all that shake everywhere. I don't have serious allergies like that, but I could barely breathe back there. And at the time, nobody, we didn't really think twice about it, They're like, yeah, on your break, go get a Zyrtec and come back and finish rolling the joint. So I don't know necessarily what the answer is and whether OSHA is going to be that answer, but I do like the fact that this is a conversation that's finally being had.
I think the answer is unions. Jason,
the answer is definitely not unions.
You're baiting him.
Yeah,
you're baiting him. Look, we don't need federal OSHA because we have state versions of OSHA. In California, we have Cal OSHA. And so what federal OSHA should be doing is, instead of wrapping their minds around the occupational safety considerations of industrial environments where we see the greatest number of worker fatalities across all industries, they should be pressuring the federal government to allow them to have the authority to be a part of the solve by changing the lack of legality at a federal level. And so instead of them trying to recreate some of the stuff that the states have already done, they should be pushing the other portions of the federal government to allow them to provide value across the nation. That's where they need to be putting their emphasis. And the other thing about this is, like, I'm sure there's a lot of information that we don't know. We get to come on here and armchair quarterback, and it's fun. But there's a lot of information that we don't know. I was talking to a former female CEO, and I was talking about TrueLeave, and I was talking about the fact that, you know, the permitting process in Florida and her husband doing that time. And I think that there's a lot we don't know. I believe that this employee, to Dale's point, probably should have never been in that type of environment based on their personal health profile. It is incumbent upon employees to be honest with their employers about their health conditions, because medical conditions are confidential. And if they don't disclose it, something that could be a minor inconvenience to somebody else could be a major incident for them. And at the end of the day, OSHA's just spinning their wheels until they actually have authority.
There was a lot posted, and the shout out to Leafly for covering the story, even though they had to retract it probably for legal reasons. They went deep on that, like with her family, with her friends and everything. And apparently, like, she had no history of any respiratory illness or any respiratory issues at all. Like, prior to, I think it was like 3 weeks before her death, she started complaining about that. She was joking about it first on social media, and then she's like, "Yo, this is really bad," to the point where she took her father's N95 mask and wore that while she was working, and it didn't help anything. And all jokes aside, yes, I was trying to bait Jason, but Jason's preoccupied over there.
Well, I mean, you are a master at that, right?
What I'm getting at is we cannot depend on government to have our backs here. And the way unions are supposed to work, I'm not saying they all work this way, but the way they're supposed to work is they're supposed to serve as a check for runaway capitalism. And right now, without federal regulation in our industry, it's going to be like, oh, should we do this? Should we do that? Can we do this? Can we do that? And if you're working at a large producer where you are going to be at risk, do it with a union job.
Unions are not a check against capitalism.
Unions are not the answer.
Are an attempt to redistribute the benefits of capitalism and to have a greater number of people at the bottom of the food chain benefit from capitalism.
All right.
It's a check against runaway capitalism, not a check against capitalism in general.
All right, fair enough.
They serve as a check for runaway capitalist leadership. Is that a better way of putting it? Right? When you have people at the top of your organization, the real pyramid scheme is American style capitalism, straight up, right? When you have people making all kinds of money and they have the power to just erase 30,000 jobs from your city's economy because they got an OSHA violation, like, oh shit, this might mean more regulation down the line. We're going to get the fuck out of this state. Like, that should never happen.
In California, the history of union involvement in the cannabis industry has been mostly focused on dispensaries, practically ignoring occupational safety considerations for farming labor staff and outdoor labor. And they have seriously missed the mark in terms of trying to penetrate the industry all the way up the supply chain, including the industrial environments of manufacturing.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, though, right? Part of the reason for that is that farm workers they don't have federal protection to unionize, right? any
I mean, tell that to Cesar Chavez. It didn't stop him from making great gains in California.
No, but so there's certain states protect the right for agricultural workers to unionize, but there's no federal infrastructure really to support that.
Yeah, where we are right
problem here,
country, there's so much rhetoric against immigrants, whether they are documented or undocumented, and I believe that's the reason why we're not going to see any kind of federal protection. Because you know what, if you really do away the way these Republicans are saying they want to do away with undocumented immigrants, expect the price of absolutely everything to skyrocket that you want to eat. Period.
What were you going to say,
Dale? Bro, you don't see the price of eggs.
Let's let Dale get a word in edgewise.
Well, what happens practically is that employers are required to have safety meetings and provide personal protective equipment. And if this woman came to work thinking, hey, I need to wear my dad's M95 mask, somebody on that management team should have said, holy shit, we need to have a safety meeting here about what's going on. So inside the beltway of this business, and this happens a lot, is that people aren't paying attention to legitimate complaints of workers. Because we do not know what goes on in a greenhouse. I mean, in California, ag workers, no one seems to give two shits about them in government, so they're exposed to all sorts of things. And we need to find out inside each environment, whether it's cultivation, processing, a distribution facility, a warehouse, what are the problems for workers from a hygiene standpoint, environmental hygiene. I think the feds can help that. There's a lot of other places don't even have the infrastructure we have in California to look for this. They just kind of throw their hands up and go, I don't know, what are we going to do about it? Well, you got somebody dead now. An insurance company will come forward and say, hey, before we insure you again, we need to see your standard operating procedures here for how you handle this shit.